So hello everyone. I hope that we've had a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining the session in good time. And I would also like to recognize the presence of our speaker today, and that is Alex Muriithi, who is also with us today. Welcome so much, Alex. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today. I hope I'm audible. Can you hear me? Anyone can confirm, please?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for the confirmation. Yeah. So as I was saying, our guest speaker for today is around. Thank you so much, Mr. Alex, for making it to the session. So I have been able to, maybe Alex, are you able to share your screen? You can just confirm, please.
Hi, Daniel. This is Alex.
Yes.
I'm not able to share my screen. If you can enable me on your end, I would appreciate it.
You can try again, please.
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much. So we can just continue. I just wanted to confirm that. Yeah. So I'll introduce our guest for the session today. That is Alex Muriithi, and Alex is a medical anthropologist who has a focus with research in who has a focus on health research, and that is applying the principles of social sciences and methodologies. So he has actively engaged in this disciplinary and multidisciplinary research activities on a range of topical issues that influence health and health outcomes. The current research that is engaging in is the global health, focusing on antimicrobial resistance and antibiotics, and is part of the antibiotic trajectories, that is the FAR project, which is being carried out at the headed by the University of Oslo, that is the Department of Community Medicine and Global Health, where he's also a doctoral research fellow. And his particular focus in this study is on the consumption of antibiotics at the community level. And this is both in human and animal health under the One Health approach. And that's why I shared a bit about that video. I know it was leaning a bit on the animal health, but it was also trying to communicate the dynamic view of all of it. And Alex also hopes to provide an ethnographic-based description of the socio-economic and material conditions of antimicrobial use that is in rural Tanzania, and he's open to learning and unlearning, engaging in discussions and debates to share his knowledge, capacity strengthening for active involvement in global health and antimicrobial resistance work. So it's a great pleasure being with Alex here today. I have read through some of the work that they're doing, and it's really, really great. And at this point, I'll hand it over to you, Alex, to take us through. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel, for this opportunity. This is yet another moment, another exciting moment. I have an opportunity to engage in a conversation, talk about antibiotics, talk about antimicrobials. I think Daniel's introduction says it all. My name is Alex. Currently a doctoral research fellow at the University of Oslo's Faculty of Medicine and Department of Community Medicine and Global Health, where I am, of course, the doctoral research fellow. We have this exciting project called From Asia to East Africa across the Indian Ocean, antibiotic trajectories. In this particular project at the department, we are looking at the trajectories, the pathways that antibiotics follow from the point of production to the point of consumption. These are two ends of a broad spectrum. From the point of production, as we see, to the point of consumption. So we're looking at mostly Asian markets, China and India. Those are the points of production. Then through importation, exportation, importation, and then circulation, and then consumption. Particularly myself, I'm looking at the consumption end, which will be the bulwark of the my presentation today. But of course, as you see, we cannot talk about consumption without talking about other dynamics taking place in distribution and access. So I am at that particular end, based at Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, looking at the socio-economic material conditions for antimicrobial use, both in human and animal health, inadvertently applying the One Health approach. I would like us to talk about antimicrobial use. And when Daniel and I were talking about this, I wasn't really sure about what to talk about, because antimicrobial resistance is an antibiotic use, a very dynamic area that needs to be looked at from a multifaceted approach, which fortunately we have in the One Health approach. It's as diverse as the reasons that have to be there, and it needs the attention it deserves. So I would like us to, in the next 45 minutes or so, look at the dynamics involved in the consumption. We want to critique the existing rationale, terms, concepts, and approaches, and we'll see what has been done, what is supposed to be done, because antimicrobial use has been established to be one of the factors driving antimicrobial resistance, which is a global problem, as we shall see. But then let us do operationalize the terms we want to use here, because I want to be very context specific. When I talk about antibiotics here, I mean a class of medicines that are active against both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. Resultantly, when I talk about antimicrobial resistance, we refer to a phenomenon where the bacterial infections are no longer responding to the commonly used antimicrobials. During this session, I will talk about some of the antimicrobials you're talking about within human and animal health, as drawn from my study fields. So let's talk about antibiotics. And first question we want to ask ourselves is, why are we talking about this in the first place? Why antibiotics? Why antimicrobial resistance? This is because of some of the three reasons I've listed in the showing slide. Antimicrobials are life-saving medicines. We can talk about the history of antimicrobials, the discovery of penicillin by Alexander Fleming, but we don't focus on the 1920s coming onwards, when we had rapid discoveries and entry of multiple antimicrobials. This was a breaking moment in medicine, and I'm noting here that the current medicine, the modern medicine, owes much to this discovery. It was a mark to control bacterial infections. It was an exponential rise to the extent to which bacterial infections would be cured, up to almost more than 95%. It was a breakthrough where surgery would be done without much concern about the complications. Secondly, we are talking about antibiotics because of access issues. Well, we appreciate that in some areas we have improved access and courtesy to various programs, both regionally and globally, ensuring availability of essential medicines, including antibiotics. But still we have underserved settings, and this constitutes what we call health inequalities. And I'm looking at antimicrobials as at the core or the nexus of health inequalities. As much as we have some areas well served with and having an almost unlimited access to antimicrobials, still we have other areas lacking access to these life-saving medicines. The third reason is why we need to talk about antibiotics and, of course, now AMR is because of the superbugs. It's because of the antimicrobials. We need to look at the effect that has been imposed by antimicrobial resistance in terms of antimicrobials losing their so-called magic power, the magic bullet. We are talking about currently having about 1.3 billion people globally having died and this death attributable to antimicrobial resistance. We're talking about the effect of AMR, that is the development of the so-called superbugs. 1.3 million people dying globally because of AMR attributed conditions or effects. Some projections are already showing that we'll be having up to 30 million people dying up to 2050. Although some of those reports have been debatable, the reality is here that there's a heavy toll on health systems, there's high mortality, and that's globally. We narrow down to Africa, look at the statistics, what they are telling us that Africa has the highest mortality rate from AMR infections across the world, having 27.3 deaths per 100,000 people, accounting for the highest in the world. I am not also saying that these are also settings that we have seen increased use of antimicrobials. The judgment I leave maybe to the audience.
Do you understand?
Sorry?
Hello, Alex, you can go ahead. I think it was someone who unmuted by mistake.
Oh, okay, thank you. The impact of AMR, we're looking at longer hospitalizations. We're looking at diseases taking longer to heal, apart from the pending mortality risk. We are looking at families and individuals undergoing risk of financial catastrophes. Remember, these are some of the things we want to prevent under the universal health coverage and the improved health systems to cushion individuals from such financial catastrophes attributed to financial healthcare. We're looking at institutional downturns. We're looking at increased absenteeism at work, employers paying a lot of money towards employees' healthcare in terms of insurance. We're looking at insurance companies, and we'll touch on this, I think, towards the end. The extent to which they will be willing to support the antimicrobial resistance programs, owing to the effect it has in terms of their income and business continuity. So this is what we are talking about AMR. It's a threat and it's already here. So then let's look at antibiotic use and resistance. So how come that we are infusing or sneaking in the issue of antimicrobial use and attributing it to resistance? Well, as of 2015, there were increasing cases of antimicrobial resistance, and there was a global call. And WHO said, quote unquote, the world urgently needs to change the way it prescribes and uses antibiotics. So that raises a lot of questions about what is this with antibiotic use? Do we have evidence that there's increased use of antimicrobials, and as a consequence leading to the risk of antimicrobial resistance? We have evidence, but let's start from the natural world itself. You and I, especially most of us from microbiology, acknowledge that bacterial mutation is natural. It's a biological phenomenon that, exposed to the environments that they're exposed to, bacteria are bound to develop some mutation, which would constitute resistance in this case. However, it has been shown, and we have lots of evidence that increased antimicrobial use is speeding up the pace of resistance, and we have more resistant pathogens than before. And this is attributable to the use of antimicrobials, both in human and animal health. We have evidence, for instance, here in Tanzania, of animal products, samples tested, randomly picked in Morogoro, Dar es Salaam, and other areas, and with positive results in regard to antibiotic residues. So what does this tell us about the use of antimicrobials in animals? And that's not the end. We have had reports, I think, as early as last year from Kenya, with reports of a study that established antibiotic residues in animal products, eggs, and meat, with samples drawn from supermarkets showing antibiotic residues. We're also going further to have evidence showing that the manure used, that's the waste from the animals, could be cows, could be pigs, could be goats. We have shown antibiotic residues, and not just antibiotic residues for that matter, but also the presence of the bugs themselves. Not the bugs, but the vectors. They could be the ticks or the tsetse flies themselves. So we have enough evidence to confidently say, without doubt, that antimicrobial use is a key driver towards antimicrobial resistance. So what's this animal called antimicrobial use? And this is what we want to look at. But then I don't know to go into antimicrobial use or consumption directly, although this is the core of this presentation, without taking you through a brief overview of what happens in the whole chain. We've talked about the whole spectrum. It's a very broad spectrum with production and consumption at the both ends. However, a lot more happens along the way. But let's look at what is happening on the left. We're looking at the production from the 1920s when we had the first discoveries and licensing and use of penicillins, and then came other types of antibiotics. We're looking at the manufacture at the point of manufacturing associated with the regulation, which is appropriate in terms of providing guidelines in regard to the quality and the ethics, laws, regulations to be followed in the manufacture probably of active pharmaceutical ingredients. Then from production, of course, a lot happens with the marketing, but we have importation, where it happens from the points of production, where we have targeted markets. For instance, the Asian markets that would be Asia, the Chinese and Indian markets, to say East or West Africa or South Africa. So that's importation, and we have importation of APIs. We have seen also that spurring local production, and we still have regulation. You know that regulation runs across, and this is about the institutions, the policy, and the legal framework set to regulate importation and probably use of antimicrobials. So at that point of importation, we also have regulation. Then we have to circulation. It is about local distribution. The APIs are here. The final formulations are here. They are in circulation, and destination is the end user. The end user is the farmer. The end user is you and I, human beings. So at this end, we have consumption, both in human and animal health. And this is the bulwark of what we are going to present today. But I want to take you through some of the fine details about the production and markets that significantly, as you will see, affect also production. It's part of the dynamics in terms of the politics involved. So here we're saying that from the 1920s onwards, towards the post-wars, that is the 1945s to 1960s or 50s, we had the discovery of penicillin, tetracyclines, and then later on was followed by the discoveries and manufacture of the fluoroquinolines and gabiminols. So until the 1990s, when of course, you and I know the antibiotic pipeline started getting dry. But of course, as you've seen, there are efforts to revive it. Another phenomenon we're looking at in the production and market is the Asian shift, as you've seen, that China and India, as the Asian markets, have taken over as the key sources of both final formulations and active pharmaceutical ingredients. But then these two markets or producers have, the so-called giant producers, have engaged in trade wars. And these are wars concerning anti-dumping policies that have invoked appropriate actions. When you talk about anti-dumping in respect to pharmaceutical industry, is the phenomenon where a market is producing antibiotics, say for instance, or active pharmaceutical ingredients, and sells that to another country or another market at a cheaper price than the home market. So that constitutes the dumping. So the anti-dumping policies have been enacted to curb these practices. And China and India have engaged in those trade wars, which have fundamentally affected production and the dynamics about antibiotics, which most of them end up, for instance, where I'm working in East Africa. So these trade wars have been lodged, claims lodged at the World Trade Organization, this is the WTO, which is fine, but the tension is these have ended up being looked at commodities, just like any other commodities, laptops, or any other commodities, not just as pharmaceutical products, which require some ethical considerations in terms of quality, in terms of other considerations. So the tension is that these are tended to be treated as at WTO level. Then what I'm saying there in the last bulletin of the slide as WHO pharmaceutical affair, which has really affected supply and quality issues regarding APIs and final formulations. Then let's look at, remember we are going down to consumption, which we talk about in breadth. We're looking at the distribution and access. So we have had importation, production, exportation, and then we have the point where we had most countries, for instance, in the lower middle income countries, importing the pharmaceutical products. Could be APIs or even the final formulations. So here we have government agencies involved in terms of regulation. In Tanzania, I can talk of Tanzania Medical Medicines and Medical Devices Authority, TMDA. I know some other authorities in Kenya, Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, and I know others in West Africa, East Africa. I mean, each national setting has such agencies that regulate such importation and also license and inspect pharmaceutical companies and distributors of such medicines. The kind of arrows showing in the slide are about the points of access. So before we talk about consumption, we need to ask ourselves an important question: what are the points of access? And medicines and other, including antimicrobials, are accessed from the showing points. From left, we have the hospitals, the pharmacies, then we have the health centers, the dispensaries, and other levels as we may have in a contextualized healthcare system. Then we have community pharmacies that are very common. I know these community pharmacies in South Africa, in West Africa, and even more profound in East Africa. In East Africa, they go by a Swahili name called Dukaladawa Muhimu, loosely translated, a shop dispensing essential human medicines. We have, that probably speaks to the human health, but then on the far right, we have the agrovets. These are shops or some other kind of establishments that dispense veterinary products and medicines. And they are agro because they could also be dispensing farm inputs. Here in Swahili called pembejeo, or what's called, I mean, the fertilizers, the seeds, herbicides, and all that. But they also said animal medicines, including antibiotics. And in my fieldwork, I'm following all these people who I feel are in contact with antimicrobials. And this could be the farmers themselves, the agrovet operators, the community pharmacists, and also in health centers and dispensaries. So in the next slide, I'm showing some of the antibiotics available, and before I come to how they are used, and these are from my fieldwork in rural Moshi. You can see this in the Manjaro region in Tanzania, and I believe that it represents other settings in the lower and middle income settings. On the left, you can see the human health. On the top is amoxicillin, and you can see all that list. I have tried to tease out these available antimicrobials using the WHO Access Watch Reserve List. And what you're seeing in green, I believe it's green, are the antibiotics available and WHO's watch access list. So that's okay. Sorry, but then again, we have the ones shaded in, I believe it's yellow. Sorry if it's not on your end, but it's ciprofloxacin, erythromycin, azithromycin, and gentamicin, among others that are equally used here, have shown listed and a watch list under the WHO watch access and reserve list. Fortunately, I haven't found any antibiotic used here or in most of these other LMICIs that are in red, and red particularly would indicate reserve or do not use, actually do not use. So that's about the human health on the left. Also on the right, we have leading there, oxytetracycline, the commonly used antibiotic, and we have those others as you can see them. Some of them are in combination, for instance, dihydrostreptomycin sulfates in combination with penicillin, G-procaine, because you and I know that, of course, penicillin G-procaine is active against Gram-G positive, and dihydrostreptomycin is active against G negative. So there's that combination. Instead of having the two separate, then they are mixed in one dosage, so that they attack bacteria regardless of positivity or negativity, if we can talk about it that way. So those are the antibiotic trajectory up to the point of consumption. So here we are. We are talking about increased consumption in both human and animal health. So what is it about consumption of antibiotics? This is a very broad, dynamic area with no particular answer. But what I have here, I want us to talk about the approaches that have been used to understand antibiotic consumption. And we have two major, or just one with some sub-premises. But this is it. We have blamed the healthcare providers for what we have called unnecessary prescription. We have blamed the patients for what we have called irrational misuse, overuse of antimicrobials. The farmers, we have also pointed fingers upon them, onto them in regard to antimicrobial use. We have also put veterinarians, who are also part of my research group, who I'm following. We have also put them at the receiving end in terms of individual behavior. And what is this about individual behavior? It is about placing the individual, you and I, the farmers, the veterinarians, all these people who come into contact with antimicrobials at the center of use. That is, if someone coming with this perspective were to ask you what is the main driver of antimicrobial resistance, they would say it's you and I, the individual behavior. You are not completing your dosage. You are not, you're buying half dosages. You are buying these antimicrobials over the counter without a doctor's prescription. And also providers, you are liable because you are dispensing these medicines also without prescription. So the tension or the risk with this kind of approach, it risks ignoring the inclusive drivers for the observed use. These are reason people do the things they do. So it's not about looking at the behavior, it's looking about what is behind that behavior. What are the motivations, the incentives behind that. And as a result of that approach, then we have had this model called knowledge deficit. It's KDM, knowledge deficit model. The premise behind this is people do the things they are doing, or they don't do the things they are not doing because they lack knowledge. And so the most appropriate and justifiably so option is to roll out interventions that focus on human behavior change. And that includes awareness creation programs, as you have seen, being rolled out to create awareness for the healthcare providers. You've seen that in terms of the stewardship teams, the stewardship programs, and other campaigns at the local levels. So we've seen all those interventions in terms focusing on behavior change. So what I'm presenting is where the thought is coming from, the strategy, and the intervention, which is the behavior change. However, I want us to discuss something about behavior change. Those of us in behavior change and communication subject know that behavior change is not overnight. It's not a process. It's not an event. However, you pass information, create awareness to the people. At the end of the day, it's the factors that make them do what they do will prevail. For instance, I've had evidence in northern Kenya where the authorities noticed transmission of zoonotic diseases. The diseases transmitted from animals to human beings through contaminated or infected milk or other animal products. That because people were taking raw milk under animal products. So based on individual behavior, deficit model, and behavior change and communication interventions, they rolled out awareness creation. But fast forward, the practices persisted. People would still take milk without boiling. And they came to have a lot of issues to do with their nomads. They may not have time to boil their milk. And more importantly, there are issues to do with energy and access to fuel. So as much as they knew they are supposed to boil their milk, and this applies to many other settings, then we have disconnect in terms of creation, awareness creation, and practice. You can pass information, but practices still remain. So what we need to do is to focus on what I'm now calling the next slide, the critical approach towards understanding antimicrobial use. And I'm noting here that in antimicrobial use is about infrastructure. It's about antibiotics being woven into socioeconomic, structural, and political lives. It's about converting antibiotics into multiple and other meanings. During circulation, when antibiotics are being circulated from maybe wholesalers to retailers, yes, they are antibiotics with actual pharmaceutical or pharmacological properties, but they're also commodities in sale. So the meanings are changing often. So we have underlying factors why we have the things we are observing. So the table I'm presenting shows the factors that might incline people who come into contact with antibiotics, including you and I, to have a behavior that is described as irrational or overuse or misuse of antimicrobials. Let's start with the left side. We have the healthcare providers who, even from the field findings, show that they experience firstly patient pressure. That is, in terms of the queue and in terms of patients who seem to know what they need. If they know it's a bacterial infection and they have had that before, they come demanding, say, amoxicillin. We have seen that list. So there's patient pressure that cannot be ignored. The healthcare providers also have their hands tied. They might like alternatives other than prescribing antimicrobials, because what other options are there in constrained healthcare system? And also within audience or clients who know about antimicrobials and wouldn't settle for long-term, but also equally effective methods such as other remedies. You don't have to take antibiotics if it's minor ailments, but there's that patient pressure. The healthcare providers must also experience constrained laboratory support and the turnaround time. So in many settings, you've seen maybe there could be programs ensuring that there is infrastructure facilities available, laboratory facilities, but then they might lack the human resource that has been shown very well in hospitals, dispensaries, and health centers, especially the the public facilities. They would also have shortage, lastly, there of staff, as you've seen or you know in antimicrobial resistance stewardship teams. Sorry, I'm moving. Stewardship teams. We've seen the call for collaborative decision making in terms of prescription, where they put together the medical superintendent, the pharmacist, the clinical officer, the microbiologist. But then in most facilities, you might not have all these, especially the dispensaries and the health centers. And even the hospitals that have the capacity, still that capacity is constrained. Then let's look at the middle column, that is called ADO, aggregate, and veterinarians. ADO, this is the term, this is something I picked in Tanzania, and it has quite some history. Is accredited drug dispensing outlets, also called Duka la Dawa. So these outlets that are accredited to dispense medicines, mainly essential medicines, as listed in the general sales list. And depending on the licensing, they might also have prescription only, or also pharmacy only medicines, depending on the level of licensing. Then agrovet and veterinarians, they face the same fate that inform their behavior, the so-called human behavior, as healthcare providers. This client demand, farmers who want to have their animals cured quickly, as you see on the right. Also for business continuity, and this is about profit. As you've seen, these commodities are not just commodities with pharmacological properties, but they are also commodities meant for business. So they wouldn't hesitate, of course, to have to sell medications or prescribe in a way that does not conform to the basic ideas of best practices in dispensing antimicrobials. The issues of client retention, the issue of reputation within the community. Remember, they mostly operate in the communities. On the other end, we have the issue of the farmers, the patients. As you've seen, antibiotics are infused in the socioeconomic and day-to-day people's lives. And so in terms of animal care, then having antibiotics is part of fulfilling that. Then return on investments, farmers do farming, not livestock keepers, because of return on investment, this business. So they would use antibiotics for prophylaxis, also used for growth promoters to reduce the cost of production, and also reduce the cost of production, as well as maximize gains. Also for therapy, when the animals are infected and they need to have a high production in terms of say milk or production or eggs, all that constitutes the return on investment. These are factors that go beyond individual behavior, because they are what we call in anthropology macro factors. They are factors that limit, incentivize behavior. Then we have also the issue of limited access to agriculture and livestock extension services. Across East Africa, I think this has been a problem where we've been seeing declining support in terms of agriculture and livestock extension services. And that has made farmers to fall for private entrepreneurs or entities. I'm not saying they're bad, but because of the factors operating in the middle column, they might not subscribe to the best practices in terms of antimicrobial use and handling. And lastly, we are talking about the ease of access to these community pharmacies compared to the health facilities. Well, we're saying that at the health facilities, probably there are programs like infection prevention or the stewardship programs have been rolled. So we will have prudent prescription of antimicrobials. But we have barriers there, including the cost, that the gaps are filled by these community pharmacies, ease of access, the ability to negotiate half dose, the ability to negotiate medications and microbials that are not even needed in the first place, as we shall see in the human medicine livestock crossover. So as a result of what we are seeing here, as a result of these practices, as a result of these factors, then we have these observed practices. We have over-the-counter purchases, because the community pharmacies have made the antimicrobials available and they may not ask maybe for doctor's prescription. They're also operating on profit-based models and economies of scale. We are seeing self-treatment and self-prescription have those sales and sales without the doctor's prescription, even for the prescription-only medicines. Another practice we are observing is what I've come to call in the field one drug. This is a term I have coined, and it's about human antibiotics being used for animal health. And you can see some of those antimicrobials being used. They are meant to be for human use, but they are being used in animals for reasons ranging from veterinary medicines are expensive, and we have seen amoxicillin working against ABCD among poultry, and so that's why we are doing this. And that has implications in terms of antimicrobial resistance, but also in terms of access. If human antibiotics such as amoxicillin being used for animals, then it means there's a unit, another human being is missing. So that's what I mean there by implication of resistance and implication on access. Briefly, I want to look at the ongoing efforts that have been used to optimize antimicrobial use. We have global partnerships. In 2015, we saw the GLASS Global Action, the Global Action Plan, such as GAP. This is a framework that was enacted by the WHO, and it urged all nations to contextualize that into their own socioeconomic context. We also have other efforts, such global partnerships and advocacy efforts, such as the it's coming up in a few days, the World Antibiotic Awareness Week. Keep checking the press and posters for details. We have local regulation that is divided into institutional. We have agencies that I've talked about. We've talked about policy frameworks such as the National Action Plan on AMR. I think in East Africa, all countries have adopted this, and it's the last year of implementation, although with observable reported difficulty obstacles. We have had monitoring and surveillance, although this is still in infant stages in most LMICs, where most data on resistance comes from sentinel studies and other isolated studies. Also in surveillance, you might have the equipment, the facilities, courtesy of various programs and initiatives, but we might lack fundamentally the human resource. Then we've seen AMR governance and leadership. We have seen them implementing the strategy, the National Action Plan in other settings. But also that has come with so many other challenges, including the lack of political goodwill and lack of recognition that AMR is a factor that needs to be acted upon immediately. We have had them rolling out stewardship programs, for instance, in the hospitals. We also have ongoing efforts in infection prevention control. The idea behind infection prevention control is as much as you prevent the infections, the lower the demand will be for the antimicrobials. And we've seen that work very well during the COVID-19 crisis. I think that's still ongoing, when there were mobilizations for people to wash hands, to maintain what we call WASH, the hygiene, water and all that. And we saw decline in such infections. The question is, how sustainable can we have such mechanisms? Then you have research and development. Although this is a problem because we've seen R&D being, for instance, funded sporadically with insufficiencies, and we are saying we need more funding and more concentration or focus on research and development. I move on to my last slide for this session on what needs to be done. And it's just what I talked about: strengthen and fund research and development, especially on antimicrobial resistance. I'm not saying that other areas are not equally significant, but you've seen a lot of focus, funding, attention, political will in reproductive health, in HIV/AIDS, in tuberculosis, and we want to see this maybe in antimicrobial resistance, tackling antimicrobial resistance, which is equally important given the socio-economic health ramifications. Talking about R&D, we want to also have contextualized research and development. Let the conceptualization, monitoring, and even implementation of these research and development initiatives be contextualized and have equal representation. For instance, in LMIs, we need to have leadership from the context and equal representation. We need to strengthen both human and animal health system strengthening. It's about strengthening knowledge for surveillance and monitoring, especially at the health, both human and animal health. It's about improving healthcare infrastructure in terms of achieving the universal health coverage, having access, staffing, and acceptability. Talking about acceptability because we would not have one of the key matrices measuring the usefulness of a healthcare system is acceptability by the clients. We need to strengthen institutions of actions. We have quite a number of institutions, government agencies, but we've seen them having weak implementation of the existing frameworks and policies in terms of their staffing, in terms of their training, enhancing their capacity to act, sometimes even expanding their mandate to act, sometimes being even prosecutorial powers and such initiatives just to strengthen the institutions for proper implementation of the existing policies. We need a multidisciplinary engagement, and this is twofold in terms of let's involve all fields, all sectors: human health, animal health, environmental health, as in one health approach. Secondly, let us have engagement in disciplines, because as we have seen, AMR and antibiotic use is no longer a health issue. It's not a medical issue. It has unique environmental, health, social, and economic ramifications, and that needs to be checked. So having multidisciplinary research to inform what works and what does not work, and also to take this message to the policymakers, because this is where decisions are made and this is where resources are allocated. We need to have a community engagement, empowerment, and education. Of course, we don't need to leave that one out. But we need to have a high level of engagement in terms of the community approach. What message are we sending? Are we telling them they are misusing antimicrobials, or they need to change how they're using microbials because of ABCD? In terms of participatory engagement in a more collaborative, meaningful way. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that comes to the end of my presentation. We've looked at antimicrobial resistance being driven purposely by antimicrobial use, and we've seen antimicrobial use is not a direct issue, is approached from a different angle or even angles, and the need to critique the existing practices, what we need to do and what needs to be done forward. Thank you very much. And Daniel, I pass it over to you. Daniel, the ball is on your court. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much, Alex, for that very informative presentation. To take it away, on, I think on my end, I've learned that there's a reason. One of the key learning is that there's a reason people do what they do. So before coming into a quick judgment or deciding, I think the way to develop best interventions is to first identify the reason why people do what they do. And antibiotics have multiple and changing meanings in the community. So they mean different. So thank you so much, Alex, for that wonderful presentation. I really do appreciate taking us deep into the social sciences. And at this juncture, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Anastasia, just to take us through the Q&A session. Thank you. Okay, I think Anastasia has some problem with network, so I'll just take them from my end. And the first question, so if you have any question, guys, you can just raise your hand as we normally do, or you can type it in the chat box as we continue. The first question was an interesting one from Zakaria, and he was asking, can more production of placebos help in reducing patient pressure in the prescription of antibiotics? Maybe can we use placebos? I think maybe as a harm reduction approach. Thank you. Over to you, Alex.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. And I think I got that question clear from Zakaria, that we have placebos as a way of curbing the patient pressure and all that. Well, that could be innovative idea and presented before a committee, but then I fear that it might suffer questions such as ethics about doing it. We need to, when you talk about placebos, I mean, Zakaria, I hope you mean substances that do not have the real pharmacological properties. So we need to have a conversation about placebos and whether they are allowed ethically in medicine. That would be contested hugely. Again, they would invite questions to do with counterfeits and fake medicines, which I have encountered in my fieldwork. Counterfeit in terms of and even substandard. I wanted to say substandard. So they might be placed into that field, the use of placebos. So, well, I'm not sure. I don't have the answers to all the questions about this, but I think, well, it's a good idea, but it would have to struggle with ethical clearance, even in production.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that. I hope Zachary is a bit clear. But as Alex has said, it's quite a wide topic, so maybe I think there could be some conversation around it. Then other question was from Iradat, and I think she was asking, how can institutions be strengthened for action, especially in developing countries? Maybe which are the low-lying fruits or penetrating points that we could use. Over to you, Alex.
All right. I got the question that how the institutions can be strengthened. Really, this is it depends on which kind of an institution that one is. But I think at a broad level, we need to start at the political willingness, at the broader administration. As I said, this is where the decisions are made. This is where resources are allocated. So if they feel through policy engagement and advocacy, feel that AMR is something that needs to be at the top of the do list, at the top of the priority, then they would roll out the necessary facilitation in terms of research, in terms of funding. You realize one of the issues affecting implementation of stewardship programs is funding and the coordination. That has been really a problem. So strengthening institutions really is about funding, is about having them their attention. That is an immediate thing that needs to be acted upon. Is about leadership and governance, political willingness. Is about, and I think all other requirements will fall in place, including facilitation, if it's laboratory equipment, if it's about legislation, because they must act against some legislation. So strengthening institutions is about widening their mandate, as I said, in terms of giving them more power to act, but of course, acting within human rights parameters. I think, so that's my summary about strengthening institutions. I will look at strengthening institutions in 3 ways. In summary, it's about leadership, it's about strategy. We have the strategy, like the National Action Plan against AMR, but it's also about resources. So when we have those 3 things, I think we have institutions strengthened. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that. Maybe because time is really running, we can take the last one. I see no one has raised their hand. And this is from Kushinga. And Kushinga is asking, with regards to the purchase of over-the-counter drugs, what are the implications if pharmacists are allowed to prescribe antibiotics for certain conditions, eliminating the need to visit a general practitioner first? Over to you, Alex, if you have understood it.
Yeah, I got the message from within Kushinga, you see. So it's about over OTC, over-the-counter purchases. And I think Yanni says you're coming from a background where over advocacy that we have seen, I think, in the last 2 decades, where we've seen availability of antimicrobials in even rural areas, and this was an action to tackle the issue raised about lack of access of these essential medicines to those communities in the rural areas, since much focus was placed on the urban areas. And I think that's the rationale that was behind, for instance, and I think many other African programs in Tanzania, the ADO program, the accredited drug dispensing outlets, essentially to make these medicines available and accessible to the people. Well, that is the strength, but what's the weakness and what is the downside of that? The downside, of course, is these adults, they might not be well regulated. We have sporadic inspections, and because of other factors, they may not subscribe to the best practices in dispensing antimicrobials. We have a risk of them negotiating half doses because at the end of the day, they want to make profits or sales, and they want to keep business running. We also see them prescribing, sometimes succumbing to the patient pressure because they want to keep the relationship. We have a lot of discussion to do with the networks and relationship they have in the communities. They want to have the retention of the customer or the client, and they want to, retain the reputation. So they wouldn't hesitate to prescribe antimicrobials, even when sometimes it's not necessary. So I think it's a balance. We need to create a balance. We read from their advantages in terms of enabling access, at the other end, enabling them to have prudent prescription. It's not a very direct answer, but it's about balancing the two sides for the common good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was the last question for the day, and I would love to take this opportunity to really thank you, Alex, for really taking us through this the presentation. I think of late what I've come to appreciate is that without incorporating or inculcating social sciences and understanding why people do the reasons or people behave in certain ways and why things are the way they are, it's very difficult to come up with feasible interventions. I think most of the members in the team can agree with me, and this calls in for a lot of multidisciplinary engagement so that at least we have different viewpoints. And even when we are creating awareness, we contextualize the message and we try and tweak it in a way that relates with whom we are addressing. And this also applies to the awareness too. We have to look at each situation in particular, understand it first before taking interventions. At this juncture, Alex, for this wonderful session. I really appreciate that you made time, despite it being that late at the moment. So thank you so much. Thank you. And also to our participants for the day, thank you also for attending the session and giving it the very best, and just listening in, asking the questions, and also making time. So at this juncture, I would love to end the session. And before, I'd just like to give Alex just a moment, maybe to share your final remarks, then we can wind up. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I don't think I have much to say, but I'm just impressed, first of all, because of one ambassador of multidisciplinarity. And I was looking at the representation, quite representative in terms of disciplines, and this is what we need. Also, just to talk about the second part, as I went up, is a collective responsibility. It's not about the doctors, it's not about the pharmacists, it's not about the veterinarians or the agrovets. It's also about the patients, you and I, the communities, and it is never a government affair. It's a collective responsibility, and let's all join hands and tackle antimicrobial resistance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. I hope that we'll have you again sometime soon and also get to engage more. So thank you everyone so much for attending today's session. I hope that you've taken some key takeaways home and have a wonderful evening. Bye everyone and enjoy your evening.
Bye-bye.